Dinesh D'Souza, at least 3 of your 9 books have really created a controversy over the years. A lot of public reaction. Illiberal Education, 1991, End of Racism, 1995, and now in 2007, The Enemy at Home. What's your purpose in writing these books? Who do you want to influence, and what do you want to have happen?
Well, I think my goal is to take many of the assumptions that are built into sometimes American culture, sometimes into liberal politics, and turn those assumptions into questions. So things that are taken for granted now become open to scrutiny. When I began, for example, illiberal education, what we now call political correctness was taken for granted. It was pretty entrenched on the university campus. So by casting a spotlight on it, I made many people look at it and say, gee, is this the way we want to do things on the campus? Is this consistent with what we call liberal education? Similarly now in The Enemy at Home, there's an understanding of 9/11 that became consolidated on the left and the right ever since 9/11, and it hasn't moved. So the debate, I think, has become tired, and clearly the war on terror doesn't seem to be going that well. So what I'm trying to do in the book is to go back to the drawing board, take some of these premises and subject them to scrutiny.
And who are these people that you want to have influence over? Is it the intelligentsia? Is it regular Americans? Is it policymakers?
It's policymakers to some degree. Abraham Lincoln once said, America is ruled by public opinion. And he didn't mean the opinions of the American public, because the opinions of the American public are only counted once every 4 years or 2 years on election day. What he meant is that there is an intelligent body of opinion. These are the people who subscribe to magazines, go on websites, contribute to various political causes. These are the people who set the parameters of political debate in which the politicians move. So that's my audience. It's the probably 1 million or so Americans who really take an interest in and consequently shape public policy.
Let's just do quickly the 3 books to give people an idea who may not know what they're about. Illiberal Education, again, 1991.
The argument of illiberal education is that in the name of diversity or multiculturalism or fighting racism, universities and colleges are subverting liberal principles. So in other words, universities say, we believe in the idea of equality of rights or equality of opportunity. But the reality is that there are all sorts of racial and gender preferences that are practiced on the campus. Or universities say, we believe in free speech, the open exchange of ideas. The truth of it is you set foot on a campus, and in a way, the more elite the campus, the bigger the problem. You find these entrenched orthodoxies. At the time I wrote Illiberal Education, there were 200 speech codes that were ensconced, that were enforced against students who were hauled up before tribunals and judiciary committees. You said something insensitive and so on. So, and similarly in the curriculum, universities talk about being open to the world, grounding young people in the great ideas of their own civilization. I found out that this was not really happening, and that instead all kinds of ideology was being smuggled into the classroom in the name of enlightenment. So that book was a sort of a close look at several American campuses to show that illiberalism was being promoted in the name of liberalism.
1995, The End of Racism.
That book grew out of illiberal education. In a way, a question that puzzled me is why non-white immigrants to this country do pretty well. And indigenous minorities, I'm thinking here of African Americans and also Native Americans. Obviously, I realize African Americans aren't strictly indigenous. They came in voluntarily as slaves, but I mean, they've been here a long time. Why do the non-white immigrants to America do pretty well? And African Americans not so well. So that was the spark that set off this book. And of course the topic is inherently controversial. The book came out at the time of the O.J. Simpson verdict, the Million Man March in D.C. So it was a bit of a tense time, although I think over time the arguments of the book have held up extremely well.
And your premise is that African Americans do this to themselves?
Well, not quite that way, but see, there are 2 theories to explain why African Americans fall behind. One is the sort of the bell curve theory that there might be a natural or genetic difference between the races. I reject that. The other is the liberal theory, which is that society artificially manufactures these differences. And I show that that's actually not very believable either. For example, you have Asian Americans and whites who score consistently higher on math tests than African Americans who come from quite middle class or even affluent families. It's hard for me to see how racism could create that kind of result. And so in the end of racism, I look at behavioral, which I call cultural, differences between groups. And the book, although in a way a kind of a clear-eyed look at some tough social problems, I think is optimistic because we can't change our genes, but we can change our culture.
And this newest book?
The newest book, The Enemy at Home, we're having this reconsideration of the Iraq debate. But I think we need to go further back to 9/11, because since 9/11, both on the left and the right, you have these very confident explanations of anti-Americanism or the volcano of rage coming from the Muslim world that, in a sense, produced 9/11. On the right, you hear the radical Muslims are against modernity. They don't like science, or they're against democracy. President Bush said they hate us for our freedom. I think that this is all a little dubious. And similarly, on the liberal side, you hear they're upset because we support Israel, or that this is solely a blowback, a backlash against American foreign policy. I think this is equally questionable. I mean, if Al-Qaeda was so obsessed with Israel, why have they never attacked Israel? Israel's right there. And so I think they use Israel rhetorically, and foreign policy is certainly one of their concerns. But I think that if you look at the literature of radical Islam, which I've been doing for the better part of 3 years now, you see a much wider landscape. And that's what this book tries to do. It tries to really open the doors on aspects of this debate that have been completely neglected.